Well, welcome back to Thinker Updates. And today we're going to be talking about faith and reason. And I've got Steve Law, my writing partner and researcher, and a fellow filmmaker with me. And we've got two guests here again. We've got Katie Deerdorf and John Hahn. And they are both Christians from a Christian perspective. They're here to talk, and they're younger than we are. And so they've got a whole other perspective. And, as we've been talking last week, we talked about, is history important. Today we're going to be talking about faith and reason. And some people don't think that the two mix. I mean, a lot of people won't think let's say, atheists and people that are out there in the scientific world or whatever say, faith has no business in the sciences. But we're going to actually challenge some of that. We're going to look at some of that today in our interview. But I'd like to ask you, what have you ever thought about faith and reason, this combination between can you have faith and what do you do with your mind?
I think it's an important topic because, well, at least from my perspective, I guess I've been focusing more on the faith side of things, but reason is important as well. And thinking about the facts and the facts of the Bible and how they all tie together, it's absolutely important.
I'm going to take a page from actually something that I heard from Andy Stanley. He talks about this some. And if you think about it, I mean, faith as an idea is just believing in something. And so we have faith. Faith is not an inherently religious term. Whenever you believe in something, you believe that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. You have faith that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Now, you have scientific reason to believe that. So faith and reason are really, they do go together seamlessly. I mean, you think about...
Well, for example, if you go out, on a flight to someplace, you have faith that when you get on that jet, that you're going to, fly safely and land. You're putting your faith in something as you're, 20,000 feet, above the ground.
And if you didn't have faith, you wouldn't get on the plane, right?
That's right.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you think about, people want to make this dichotomy between science as reason and faith with religion. But I mean, you take science, the scientific method, that relies on the power of observation in our senses. I mean, that is an incredible act of faith to rely on and trust your eyes and trust your senses. You have to have faith that they're not lying to you, which they often do. I mean, optical illusions, it happens all the time. And so we create machines and different ways to enhance our senses and to mitigate those errors. But fundamentally, we have faith in our senses, and that is the foundation of the scientific method. So to separate faith and reason is a false dichotomy in my mind.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier that you were saying that you've really focused often on your faith, and that you haven't really thought much about, does there have to be any, empirical, evidence? And there's a lot of people that talk about that.
And I suppose where I was going with that, or for a question for a lot of people, is do you have to have the facts to have faith? Do you have to have the hard evidence with your faith to be saved even? And the answer to that for me is no, you can have faith and be saved by Christ, but having all of that evidence and the facts and believing in the truth of the Word just supports the faith that you would have, in my opinion.
Well, I know that there's a verse where I think the Apostle Paul writes that if Christ didn't rise from the dead, if there wasn't a resurrection, then our faith is futile. So there was an act of resurrection that if it didn't happen, then this whole thing is over. And Steve, you've also had some people, writing in and sort of criticizing this idea of patterns of evidence. They're like, well, why do you need evidence? You're just supposed to have faith.
Right, and it's true that we'll never have evidence for every detail in the Bible. We'll never have archaeological evidence for every fact. But if it's true, you will find evidence. Otherwise, it has no correspondence with reality. So I think it's just important. The Bible stresses over and over that the foundational nature of truth, the importance of truth. It's not just believing in something, it's believing in something that is purported to be true. And so I think if if you think about the idea of to love God, you need to know God. Well, to know God, you have to have knowledge. You have to use reason, because if you don't know God, you can't love God. So even in the act of loving God, reason is there. They're handmaidens. They come together, and I don't see any reason, even though the culture is defining faith as believing in something even though it's not true. I mean, that's kind of the popular view of faith. That's not the Bible's view of what faith is.
Well, I think the question, as a filmmaker that's trying to investigate these things, I'm asking the question, is it true? Is it real? Is there any, that's what this investigation is about. Is there any evidence for this testimony that was written over thousands of years? And today we're going to actually hear from Dr. Greg Thornberry, who's going to talk about faith and reason. So why don't we take a moment and watch that, and we'll be right back. Dr. Gregory Allen Thornberry is an intellectual and the 6th president of New York City's The King's College. Dr. Thornberry attended one of our New York City showings and was greatly affected by the film because earlier in his life he had his own challenges with the dynamics between faith and reason. People such as Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens basically say that faith is a great compound, that people of faith don't think. They're not really intellectuals, they're just following emotion and feeling, and that's why we should discount these ancient stories, because there's no evidence for that. Is the idea of faith a blind faith, or is there an intellectual endeavor to it?
The Christian faith is definitely intellectual in its dimensions, and to suggest otherwise is pure ignorance of history. If you go back through the ages and you look at geniuses like Pascal or Leibniz, who were fundamental figures in the development of the calculus, for example, progenitors of modern science like Francis Bacon, and the inductive method of scientific inquiry upon which people like Richard Dawkins and people of his ilk stake their claim. These people were all Christians. Modern science arose in the Christian West because there was this relentless pursuit of the truth, this willingness to say we're going to go wherever the evidence leads. And you can look at the legatees of the Christian intellectual tradition. You'll find some of the greatest philosophies in the history of Western philosophers in the history of Western civilization, including some of the leading scientists in the history of Western civilization. They were driven by the fact that they felt as though God created the world in a rational fashion. So we should be able to figure out how it is put together. That's how modern science arose from a previous era of superstition. And so everywhere that I look, I see people of faith striving to understand their faith better, not to hide behind a prayer, but to sink their roots deeper, to understand the intellectual dimension of the faith. And certainly you see that in the history of the great universities of the past and present, people who are of faith who say that we not only believe, but we seek to understand what we believe. So it's not just purely a leap in the dark. It's not pure fideism. Instead, it is a genuine exploration of where the evidence leads.
So are you trying to suggest that it's okay to have these questions? There are some Christians that might think that, oh no, we can't question anything. I had to actually, as I was making the film, realize that, hey, I have the freedom to ask questions, because a lot of people actually have them, but they might not say them.
The truth is the truth. And to use a cliche, the truth will out. And if we truly believe that there is an intelligent God who speaks in sentences and paragraphs to his people through his word, the Bible, and gloriously through the created order, we really believe he is who he says he is, an omnipotent, omniscient God, then he can take any question that we have. we don't need to run from away from our doubts, but run to them. As a matter of fact, that is the singular genius of Christianity, is to invite those questions. This is what Jesus did after the resurrection. He invited questions. He held his hands out to Thomas and invited investigation. This has always been the spirit of Christianity, and it is the testimony of the leading giants in the history of the faith. Look at St. Augustine, for example. He began in doubt. He didn't believe the faith of his mother, Monica, who was a Christian. He spent years thrashing about, studying all kinds of worldly philosophies like Manichaeanism. He was a dissolute youth. He was, and eventually, through asking hard questions of the Bible and about himself, he came back to faith. Another preeminent example of this is C.S. Lewis, who came to Oxford University talking to people like J.R.R. Tolkien as an atheist, as a skeptic. And it was through his questions about, well, don't all these mythologies all just sound like the Bible? There's evidence in the ancient Greco-Roman world of stories of gods dying and rising again. Isn't Christianity just another one of those? And what was Tolkien's response? Tolkien's response to Lewis was, exactly, they're all pointing towards an uber myth, a myth that ties them all together. And in the case of Christianity, what if it's the myth that actually came true? So it was through that tough, iterative series of asking tough questions that Lewis came to faith. Hard-won faith. He felt as though there was nowhere else to go but to believe after that process. Now, I'm not saying that's everybody's experience. Some people find God very easily, but there's an increasing number of people, including the students that I know, that coming to faith is something that takes place over a very long time, and after all their questions have been answered, and then after all their questions have been answered, there's always more questions. But Christianity has always invited that from the outset, and there's no reason to change now.
Okay, so what do you guys think?
I love it when he says truth is truth. And we shouldn't be afraid as Christians to pursue that truth. There's a rich background of Christian history of pursuing the truth. And he mentions Jesus himself. I've got a friend who recently became an agnostic because his church background, his church experience, was one where when there was truth that was found, whether it was scientific or otherwise, if it didn't fit their pre-existing thoughts about faith, they would block it out and dismiss it. And he grew up in that way.
So he wasn't, in other words, he wasn't getting answers to questions?
Exactly. And so he has this picture that Christianity doesn't care about the truth. It cares about their set of beliefs, regardless of what truth says. And that's patently false. God is truth. When we find truth, we're finding part of God.
Well, Katie, how did that hit you, what Dr. Thornbury was saying?
It just got me thinking more about how much it really is intertwined. I know I said earlier that you can be saved by just having faith, and that facts behind that are just backing it up. But don't get me wrong, I absolutely do believe that they are very much intertwined and working together. And so I guess when I think about it, why wouldn't someone want them to be combined and working so well together? Maybe it's because people are afraid of the truth, one might say, or just because it might be too much to handle. But I think there's a responsibility that comes once we know what the truth is. Not only is it helpful with our faith, but there's just so much more to it than that, and it makes us think about, well, what do we do with this next?
Yeah. The thing that's happening to me as I'm going on this journey, as we're making these films, is I'm starting to realize that, I was sort of asleep. My mind was asleep. There's a verse that we talked about in Deuteronomy. It talks about how we're supposed to love God. And then later on, it's in the book of Mark. And it really says that we're supposed to love God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. So this issue of our mind is included in how we're supposed to do that. So they're not supposed to be two different things. There's not supposed to be this sort of cognitive dissonance that's happening between our mind and our thoughts.
I think Israel Finkelstein in the film kind of demonstrates that. He says, I keep my traditions, my Passover tradition here, and I keep my scholarship here. You know, the two never come together. But can you really live that way? Does your faith or your tradition mean anything? If it's not really true, then what's the point of it? You know, and so it just seems to me that our reason is a gift from God. It's part of who God is, and so therefore, since we're created in His image, it's part of who we are, and we're to use it to know and love Him. So I just think it does go together.
And that's the thing I'm learning about. You know, I mean, obviously I'm a filmmaker. I'm asking these questions. Steve and I have been researching this material, and we're trying to be as objective as we can and let as many people talk about what their views are so that we can objectively, with our mind, understand, you know, what's going on here. And I think that that doesn't mean that I haven't had doubts in the past or haven't had questions. And I think that all of us can have questions and have about that. But if you continue to pursue this makes an awful lot of sense. And I really think that that's what this is about, is investigating this amazing, call it a story, a narrative of the past, because I'm curious, well, where did I come from? Where did we come from? And where are we going? And that's what this is really about. Okay, well, that's about it for Faith and Reason. But next week, we're going to talk about Jericho, and we're going to talk about evidence at Jericho. So stay tuned for the next Thinker Update.